There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am filming a book review for a novel that I read as part of the semi-final judging round of the BookTube Prize. So you won't see this for several weeks, but I'm filming it a couple days after I finished reading Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is a debut novel published last year, obviously, and Delia Owens is a non-fiction wildlife science writer or nature writer. She has co-authored a bunch of books. She lives in Idaho. This novel is set on the Barkley Cove on the coast of North Carolina. So let me start with the positive. There is some just absolutely stunning, gorgeous nature writing, and even though I'm a reader that doesn't care so much about setting, I thought the setting was so well rendered on the page that was my favorite character. The protagonist, Kia, lives in, is it in or on? In the marsh on this cove, and it's a gorgeous place and certainly gorgeously described. The novel opens with a fantastic historical natural description of that area, and there's a lovely map here, and that was so incredibly well done. The bad news is that everything else about this novel sucked so bad. It was just a really awful novel. I can't believe it made it this far in the BookTube. Well, people have different tastes, so I am going against the ratings and reviews of several of my bestest BookTube buddies. So, you know, I respect that there are different readings of one book, but this read like the worst of an take the stereotype of an Oprah pick and then to the third degree, and that's what this is. And I loved a lot of Oprah books, but the stereotype of an Oprah book, overwrought, overly sentimental, this was just the worst. 2 stars, so it's not the worst, but it was really bad. The protagonist is Kia, and around, 1952, her mother abandons the family because the dad is so abusive. And so the opening scene where we meet them in the early 1950s is Kia watching her mother walk off and never to return. So she's left with a few siblings that haven't left yet. So half of her siblings have already left because the dad is such an asshole. So the first problem I had, because eventually it's Kia left, and she's about 5 or 6. She's very young, and she's left with her violently alcoholic father who disappears for days and weeks at a time, and she's left to fend for herself. That was moving at first, and it was believable that she was scrounging around for food, and they were a kind of a white trash family, already isolated in the marsh, not accepted by the townspeople, just a few short miles away. But she does tentatively reach out for a little bit of help. But then the first thing that turned me off was the father came back, and his character was not coherent. He was gruff, but quite caring to her for a few days or a few weeks, and that just didn't fit with anything else going on. And I just thought, okay, characterization is going to be a problem in this novel, and was I ever right? Of course, an alcoholic, abusive father would be capable of momentary tenderness to his young daughter. She was about 6, and she would respond to that. I don't mean to say that that's unbelievable. I just think the way it was portrayed didn't show any sophistication or nuance, and it just felt like the whole narrative was upended, and now the father character is good. I mean, there's a way to do that, to show the nuance and to show the heartbreaking conflict of that kind of a parent-child relationship when there's abuse and addiction. I just thought it was really badly done. As she grows up, she befriends a couple guys. The first one is it Tate? Yes, Tate. And eventually, many years later, they do form a connection that turns romantic. And the older Kia got, the more ridiculously unbelievable her character was. And I don't care about spoilers, so don't watch this. I'm not going to spoil everything, but in order to show what a stupid book this was, Tate teaches her to read in 3 easy lessons, and then within weeks she's reading scientific journals. It's so stupid. Completely unbelievable. I couldn't connect emotionally with anything going on because the whole story was just a fantasy. There was nothing realistic about it. Kia was like a hick, and I'm using that word. We could see the prejudice of the townspeople against her, but the author was too romance novelish to show why anybody might have that reaction. She must have been really brusque. She must have been, not the best smelling person. Personal hygiene must have been an issue. I mean, she had access to water. I don't mean to go overboard in my criticism, but she must have been really crude. We don't see any of that. She's just, such a nice person. It was just like Dickensian bullshit transposed to 1960s North Carolina. It was so sentimental and completely unbelievable. I am ranting. I didn't mean to rant. So she learns to read from they met, maybe we don't see all the times they met, but he's a couple years older than her. He teaches her to read. She never goes to school. She goes one day, and that's disastrous, and I'm still connecting with the story at that early stage. And then he kind of disappears for a while, and he comes back. So enough, no spoilers about that. And then she gets involved with another guy in the town, Chase. And it was just a sappy bullshit romance. It was horrible. I mean, it just dripped with insipid, unbelievable. Nobody in this book was convincingly drawn enough that I gave a shit about anything that happened. The closest I came to feeling any kind of an emotional tug to the way the story developed was that I often caught myself thinking, if this wasn't such an awful book, and if these characters were even a smidge more believable, I would be really moved right now. I, again, feel that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. The characterization in this novel was so terrible. And I would argue with anybody about that. There's a bunch of other things that just for me personally, I realize that strong characterization is also a personal preference, and some readers obviously don't care about that. But, realistic, believable characters, that's fine. That's totally fine. Calm down, Shawn. But there are quite a few other things that just I hate as a reader, and I believe all book prize judges use their own personal likes and dislikes to assess a book, and I'm using them. Doesn't matter if anybody agrees with me or not. The murder mystery part of this was just ridiculous, stupid, had no business being in a literary novel. I mean, she was obviously trying to harness the rich energy of To Kill a Mockingbird and failed miserably. It was so cliched and uninteresting, because somebody gets murdered and she gets blamed. I think that, I don't even say who. Yeah, the book jacket says it's Chase. Chase is found murdered in 1969, and eventually she's suspected. And that was all just eye-rollingly boring. So I hated that. The conventions of mystery novel cheapen literary fiction, so if I had been reading myself, I would have bailed. But especially as ham-handedly as they were employed here. And she loves poetry, so there's pages of poetry, and it's Hallmark card poetry. Oh my God. I think it is. I only read one. Immediately went to the bathroom to wolf my cookies and never read another poem, because poetry in fiction is a crime against humanity. So, those are my personal things that I didn't like about it. But the main fatal flaw that made this a really awful book was the characterization. The characters were not believable. The story was not believable. What a waste of valuable reading time. 2 stars. And I suspect I'm in the minority, and this may well advance to the final round. So, take it for what it's worth, people. Thanks for watching.